Right. Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. I'm delighted to have Angela back. And today we are going to be talking about polymaths in organizations. Take it away, Angela.
All right. Well, it's good to see everyone. I see some familiar faces here, which is so nice, and some new people too. So everybody, welcome. If you don't know, my name is Dr. Angela Cotellessa, as Shrikant said, and I wrote my doctoral dissertation on the lived experiences of modern day polymaths. And I'm really passionate about this topic, which is why I'm here and why I keep talking about it. And today's topic, as Shrikant said, is about polymaths in organizations, which can be kind of a challenge. And I'm actually co-writing a book on this very topic right now that hopefully will be released next year called Polymaths and the Business Organization. If you're new to this topic, I just want to start off by saying a couple basic things. First, what is a polymath? Here's a definition I like to use. Polymathy is active engagement in multiple interests or endeavors, integrating vocations with avocations, so work with hobbies, simultaneously or serially across the lifespan. And that is the definition by Bob and Michelle Root Bernstein. I consider Bob really the forefather of polymathy studies. It also is not yes or no, black and white. It exists on a spectrum. So you do not have to be a Leonardo da Vinci to consider yourself a polymath. There's a spectrum. All right, so today we have a special guest, someone who is highly polymathic. He's a member of our Polymaths Place Facebook group, which if you guys are not a member of, please consider joining. There's also a YouTube channel, by the way, called Polymaths Place. If you want to learn more, there's probably over 40 videos there that you could check out if you'd like. All right, so Chris, could you take a couple minutes to tell us who you are and a bit about your background?
I'm sure most polymaths, Angela, could take years talking about this. Luckily, I talk fast. My name is Chris Foltz, and currently I'm the vice president of global reach for a magazine company, a media brand in the cannabis space, award-winning brand, truly exciting. For those of you that have not looked at the cannabis space, whether you don't necessarily have to be a consumer, most of our readers are not necessarily just consumers. It's a wildly interesting polymathic style industry. Originally, I started my life in the world of politics. And when I say I started my life there, my first political responsibility started at the age of 12. And then from politics, I kind of moved up there's a spectrum to anything. There's a spectrum to politics, right? So I moved up the political ladder, started working in presidential politics. But one of my defining moments in life was when I became a drug addict, started over after spending time in jail homeless, and ultimately started with nothing and rose in the world of communications to where I am right now. So I'm sure we'll get into more of the details about that throughout, our conversations. But, that's at least me in a general nutshell.
Wow, such a broad spectrum of experiences. I love that. All right, so everybody, here's a quick overview of how our time today is going to go. I'm going to start off just kind of telling you a little bit about polymaths and organizations, high level information I heard from the real polymaths I interviewed and the research that I did. After that, Chris and I are just going to have a discussion. I'm going to ask Chris some questions. I'm going to share some more information. That'll probably take 45 minutes to an hour. And then there'll be the breakout rooms. Where you guys can chat in smaller groups. And then after the breakout rooms, you'll come back to the main room and share some takeaways from the overall experience today, and we'll wrap up. So that is the plan for today. All right, and I want to say too that as we talk about polymaths and organizations today, some of what I share will be for employees. So what the experience is of polymaths in organizations from my understanding, or tips I have, recommendations I have for employees. Some of what I'm going to share is also if you're in a leadership position in the organization, what I would advise or recommend or encourage you, invite you to think about. So there's going to be some dual-headedness, employee perspective and leadership perspective. All right. So first off, why does this topic matter? I want to address that. Why does polymathy in business organizations matter? Well, we live in an age of specialization. We have been told a narrative that in order to be successful professionally, you need to specialize and do so very deeply for the entirety of your career. Pick one thing, not two or three, just pick one thing that you're going to become really, really expert in. And that's how you should live your life. Polymaths don't do that. So when polymaths are in organizations, it can be like a bit of a challenge, because they're not specialists living in this world that prefers specialists for the most part. Why does it matter? It also matters because we live in a very, very complex time. 2020 has been a real good example of complexity. And if we want innovation, if we want creativity, if we want to rise up to the challenges of our time, polymaths can be quite useful in organizations, because now where you see the big payoffs for innovation and creativity is at the intersection of disciplines. And that's where polymaths sit. They sit at the intersection of disciplines, given their broad base of experiences and their big toolkits. So that's why polymaths matters in organizations, is for creativity and innovation. For any organization, here's a note to organizational leaders, or I'm speaking to them at this moment. If you're in a leadership position in an organization and you want innovation and creativity, if you want to remain sustainable, competitive in the landscape, if you want to have a competitive advantage over, as the environment shifts and you want to remain the best in your market, if you want to stay efficient, if you want to stay cutting edge, if you want to be able to create new knowledge, if you want employees who can wear multiple hats and contribute in different ways over time, if you want a culture where people are encouraged to think and exist outside the box and actually bring their full selves to be authentic in the workplace, if you want people on your team who are committed to continual learning and continual improvement, if you want to harness the full human resources, the full human potential and capacity of your team, and if you as a business leader want to see your organization grow and improve over time in strategic ways, you should have some polymaths on your team. Okay, I'm clearly very biased, but all those things I just said, polymaths can contribute to and be a part of. And what business leader wouldn't want to have those experiences? All right. One thing, just a couple other comments, and then we're going to get into discussion, Chris. Frequently, now I'm taking off the organizational leader hat and I'm talking to people who are just applying for jobs in organizations. I remember being in college and being taught how to make a resume. And what I was told, I'm guessing you guys were told the same thing, is that you look at the job advertisement and you take your resume and you edit and censor your resume to match the job. So you delete things, actually. You delete capacities and experiences even, or you morph them to tell a different kind of story. And basically charade as a specialist to match that one job. And it's kind of a lie. We're kind of taught to mislead a bit. Polymathic people are basically, what's been happening, I think, is that polymaths have been charading as specialists because that's how they think to get a job, I have to pretend to be a specialist. It can be frustrating to be a polymath in an organization where you feel like you can't bring your full self or your full talents to work. Chris, I see you nodding. Many of them feel underutilized, like they're not really using their full talent because they're pigeonholed into a box. Every once in a while, a polymath will feel their organization does realize their capacity and overtasks them, gives them too much responsibility. And so they can feel bored or they can feel stressed. It's really hard to get that like Goldilocks, like not too hot, not too cold, like just right balance when you're this multifaceted polymath. Many polymaths get so frustrated actually existing in organizations who don't really understand them that they become entrepreneurs. They decide to take the risk, leave the stability of being employed and do their own thing. And that is scary. I just got an email today from someone who's like, can we talk? Because I don't think I want to stay doing this one thing, but I want to do multiple things. And can I talk to you about it? Because that's scary to really forge your own path, but it can also be so rewarding to really create your own unique professional path. So entrepreneurship is something that you see frequently with polymathic people. Bottom line though, I guess what I want to say before we dive in further with discussion with Chris is that in my opinion, organizations are missing out. Like if they can figure out how to tap into specialist talent, tap into polymathic talent, get them in the right roles. And there's different ways of figuring that out. They would function better and employees would be happier. They'd be better matched to the work they do. All right, so that's a high level overview of what I know about polymaths working in the age of specialization. Chris, let's talk. I mentioned a minute ago that, you know, frequently polymaths have to tell this kind of story of specialization, even if they're not really naturally specialists, like they're more polymathic by nature. And I'm wondering if you're highly polymathic, Chris, and I'm wondering if you've ever felt that pressure to kind of squish and tell the story, you know, squish into a mold professionally, and what was that experience like, and how did that impact you?
You know, I think that, you know, anyone that takes a look at my website or my LinkedIn will see all these things that I've done. And a lot of them are just a result of tactical abilities I've picked up through the world of, I guess, of being a polymath. You know, I would say that it's more or less the specialist is what I would use as something that allows me to penetrate in the door. For instance, you know, in a large corporation, if you sit around at the beginning and you're part of the fold and you're listening, maybe you come in to do a consulting opportunity in one bucket, you find the thing that is missing. So oftentimes it would be websites for me, for instance, because it's very easy for me to make a website. It's more of my creative way of writing a press release. I found that I much rather just make a website because it invokes a couple different emotions and it makes it much easier for me to present a message. So I would use that as a tool. Hey, corporation, let's do an initiative together. It requires this substantial website and I'm going to do it for free. And if you do that, right, and you're willing to put the work in, it doesn't necessarily make you feel that you're forced into a box, Angela, but what it does is it gets other people to typecast you. And I think that's what often is the case, because somebody that does something for free, you know, it can't be good. You know, why would they do it for free? What kind of side motivation do they have? You know, matter of fact, in Illinois, where I was in public office for 3 terms, I wanted to volunteer to do something for a town. And they really needed help for something. And I actually couldn't do it because the way that the law is set up, that you're prevented from volunteering. So that's the only time I was not able to use that to get in the door. So that's when I just got into public office, and that was my way in there. But in short, yes, I use it as something, but it does typecast and cause additional problems down the line.
Right. One of the things that I sort of am advocating for and observing about organizations and employees is that there's really 2 types of role. Like at a high level, I'm oversimplifying it, but there's basically 2 types of roles in any organization. There's the role that's very routine, very stable. It's a kind of kind environment. You know what to expect. And you know, something like accounting. Accounting is very, very stable. And then there's other types of roles where what you did last year, if you just keep doing that forever, will get you in trouble. It will put you at risk. So there's positions where there's a VUCA environment, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. You have harsh learning environments, wicked problems. And so if you see like, okay, there's stable positions and then there's like VUCA, wicked, harsh positions, then doesn't it follow logically that there should be kind of 2 types of employees that go into those worlds? And so what I advocate for is that specialists are great for those routine, stable roles. And if you put a polymath in that world, they will be so bored and so underutilized. A polymath is better suited over here. They typically like challenges, puzzles. They like to untangle things. They like to pull from their multifaceted backgrounds, use all the tools in their toolkit to step into and brave the difficult roles. So, and we need a strategic mix of both. So Chris, when I say that, you know, there's 2 types of roles and 2 types of employees, generally speaking, does that resonate with you? Does that make sense to you? Based on your experience, what comes up for you?
It certainly makes sense. And what you generally find is as you go up the corporate ladder or any hierarchy in an organization, you tend to actually get to the pinnacle terminal specialist in roles, right? So your vice president of sales, they're an amazing salesperson. Although they can speak, salespeople are interesting. They can speak in all these different facets that would generally lend to the fact that they're generalists. They're actually finely tuned specialists, and that's usually what happens. But what you also find at that top level, there's kind of a disruption in continuity of teamwork, because people don't need to work better in teams per se, because they're already the best in their particular buckets. Where I work right now, so thankful that they embrace the idea of, we'll call them my idiosyncratic behavior, right? Like, so, the polymathy in me doesn't necessarily I'm a transformer. Okay. That's really what it is. I'm a person that's about reforming and making changes. There's never going to be an environment where I don't think there's some positive changes that can be at least considered. So right away, that's so disruptive. And after you kind of get through that veil and show that you actually mean it from a point of authenticity, authenticity is the new disruptive. So all of that creates this environment. And finally, in the role that I am in now, that didn't even exist before. They literally created a position to facilitate this for me. They allow me to build a team with, and I know you like to look at it as generalist and specialist. They allow me to build a team of what I consider to be polymathic generalist at the top versus down at the bottom in an organization. And then what that allows us to do is build a great team of specialists underneath us. And it's a very unique model. We started from scratch on it. It's proving to be overwhelmingly effective. And part and thanks to work by people like you, who actually help lay the framework out for people like me to show the people that we work with, hey, listen, there might be another way to get the most efficiency out of people. So exciting.
I love that you said I'm a transformer, and immediately got like this image of like a robot turning into a car.
I felt right when I said that, it's going to be, oh my goodness, am I calling myself this transformer? But it's transformation, right? There's never a wrong time to reinvent. You grow up learning that. Why would you reinvent the wheel? And the only reason why we don't reinvent the wheel is because people ask that question. Why would you reinvent the wheel? So it becomes this kind of scenario that we live by. And in brands, especially when you're dealing with Fortune 100s and Fortune 50, some of these large, massive corporations, anytime there's change, that's basically a mandate on what is the status quo. And somebody was in charge before who implemented that. And what you are doing, any change, is calling that person out for something that needs to change. So that it's always this fear that's built around it. And the challenge being a polymath, which again, as you know, I have fought with the naming of things, and prodigy, genius, all these things. I don't necessarily like it because of the typecasting that comes with it. But when you look at things from a dynamic nature, what generally you ruffle a lot of feathers, right? But at the same time, when corporations and brands realize that it's not meant for the wrong reasons, it started for the right reasons, then it doesn't end for the wrong reasons, and it continues on for the right reasons. And with that, we've been able to see tremendous amount of change across the entire corporation. And in our industry, the cannabis industry is young. So a brand like ours, who are the leaders in our category, we changed the entire industry by just changing the way that we look at things as an executive team, because of this idiosyncratic behavior that I exhibit on a regular basis.
One thing I just want to go back to, Chris, just to make sure anyone watching this or those people here today listening have a real full grasp about just how polymathic you are. I just want to go back a bit to your back. So and please correct me if I'm wrong, but in addition to your work for Sensi right now, you have worked on many different political campaigns. You've been in public office yourself. You've built robots. You have like a feral cat colony in Nevada right now that you also do on the side. Tell us a little bit.
All right.
Pull some more gems out, just so we really understand.
So, it's one of the things, it's one thing to be involved in a lot of different categories, right, in life, but I've been involved at the extreme level of them and on both sides. So for instance, in politics, I started when I was very young. My first actual passion in life was actually science. My mother got me involved with the young astronauts, all of these things because, I wanted to be an astronaut. My mom would actually keep me at home to watch the space shuttles launch. And, both my parents were in law enforcement. So it was so beyond the status quo for somebody in law enforcement to even imagine their child doing that. But my parents divorced when I was 18 months old. So that led to me being part of NASA's SARX program, SARX-2, which was an experiment that they did to more or less engage communication between astronauts in space and people on ground using ham radios. And here I was, I can't actually remember how old, maybe 10 years old. And I was the first person to talk to astronauts in space through this program. And it was just wildly fascinating. And, from that, my mom said, what do you want to do next? So I wanted to build robots. And, my dad and I have not always seen eye to eye in life. He's kind of he likes, woodworking and things of this nature. So I came to him, I said, Dad, there's this program at school where we get to build a robot. Well, it was actually an invention competition, and I thought it would be a great idea to build a robot. Now, mind you, this is grade school. My dad helped me with the project. He ended up coming up with this wood contraption, and I was somewhat disappointed. And I would say that today that pretty much shaped my life. It was my reaction to what would be presented if you ask people that are already the authority in your life and expect that what they present you is all that can be. And I wasn't going to have that. So I built my first robot at that point. I entered into a competition. It swept the floor. And I remember I didn't win. And, it looked a bit crazy. But the reason I didn't win, I thought was fascinating. They said it's not practical, and it would never be practical for a robot to sweep and vacuum the floor. Now, I wish that people would take a look at Roomba, and the teachers at St. Bernadette Middle School and grade school in Rockford, Illinois, would look at the Roomba business right now. And I would say that it successfully has conquered that industry. Moving forward in politics, I've been involved on both sides of the aisle in a fairly prolific way, I guess. Just anybody in society that has seen things from that level. It's fascinating to view. I first started, my uncle was a lobbyist in the Republican Party. He was worked on the Brady bill. So I was a Republican by virtue that the uncle I looked up to was. I didn't really know anything about it. I wasn't partisan by nature. Got me involved with the congressman when I was 16 years old. Actually, I was 15, was driving him to events. Lo and behold, you need to be 16 to have a driver's license, but I got away with it. 18, I worked for Elizabeth Dole when she was running for president. In politics, as long as you do good at your task, you kind of move up. I was a good communicator. I say this, and I don't mean anything bad by it to anybody out there, but I was a fat kid growing up. And, when you're chunky, if you will, it forces you to develop other skills. So for me, it was communication, and that proved to be perfect in politics, Republican Party politics specifically. So by the time I was 19, Elizabeth Dole decided she wasn't running for president anymore. So some people from her campaign, Ari Fleischer, some key people in George W. Bush's actual presidency, went from Elizabeth Dole's campaign over there, and so did I. So I traveled around, served on the advance team, Republican National Convention, all these exciting things. And then from there, a bunch of races that we're probably all upset about now, I was involved in back then. So whether it be Arnold Schwarzenegger's California governor's race or Haley Barbour down in Mississippi, major change races. But, it really gives me a jaded perception on life, right? When you get involved in politics as your first thing in life, it's a lot. And so my mother got sick with cancer. So I moved back home, and I figured, hey, I'm going to scale all this stuff that I did in politics. And, if you can get George W. Bush elected to president, and I was in the pretty key positions at that time, you can pretty much do anything. So I'm going to scale this to the music industry. So I moved to my mom's basement, and I created my first entertainment agency. So I'm like, so I started marketing musicians and everything in my mom's basement. In the first couple of weeks, I had my wisdom teeth pulled. And for those of you that want more information about this whole thing, there's a BBC special on it. But I had my wisdom teeth pulled, and I got the Vicodin. And, more or less, they give you 2 months worth of prescription for Vicodin. But Angela, it doesn't really hurt that much when you have your wisdom teeth. And I did all of it in 2 weeks. And so here I am in my mother's basement. My mom is a celebrated law enforcement personnel, first police officer woman. She sued for equality for law enforcement. And I'm in her basement, and I'm addicted to opiates. And, it's not like you can get Vicodin very easy. So that graduated to Oxycontin, and then from there, heroin. This is just over 10 years now. So it's always interesting on speaking to her. I would talk about this so often. I've really owned this space in my life, but, reflecting upon it now, it just seems so crazy. So here I am in my mom's basement, addicted to heroin. And the only thing that stopped me from this, my mother passed away. And the judge who I actually got involved with on one of my first political campaigns, he knew I was going to end up dying and overdosing. So after my mom's funeral, I'm at the funeral house the day after, and here's the reality of the situation. Um, on the planning day for the funeral, uh, as we're leaving, I'm a heroin addict. I'm completely out of my mind. My mother just died. There was a coin purse on the ground. I took the coin purse. Nobody would realize this. I go home, there was 60 some dollars in it. And I figure, wow, I'm going to take the money, buy drugs, and I'm going to bring the coin purse back. You could see that it was somebody that worked at the funeral home. By the time I went to the funeral home the day after to finalize the plans, that person had already called the police. So as I'm greeting the people during my mom's funeral, that I didn't know at the time, they would all be arresting me the day after. Now, this would have been petty theft, but that judge saved my life. That one that I got involved with in one of my first political campaigns. He put a $250,000 warrant out for me. So that means outside this funeral home, about 8 to 10 police cars are out front. I'm being arrested for more or less petty theft with a $250,000 warrant because he knew I would have bonded out. So here I am sitting in jail with a lot of people that my parents arrested. Now, if you're going to hope that your polymathic skills come to shine, you better hope it comes to shine in jail, because you're going to need all of the skills you can to survive when your parents arrested most of the people. So I moved around in the various places and I did find a way. I would teach Bible study, GED classes. I would be the jailhouse lawyer, help somebody get out that didn't deserve to be there, which is fascinating. You learn there's this whole jail economy that exists. And I never realized I'd ever go to jail. Here I come from presidential politics and I'm in jail. So when I get out of jail, here's the challenge with it. Now my mom's house was foreclosed upon. So I'm getting out of jail. I have no place to go. My dad picks me up. I'm court ordered to move to a recovery home in a town I've never been to. 74% Hispanic population. I don't know anybody in the area, but it's a recovery home, a program called Oxford House. So I get out of jail. Everything I owned was thrown into dumpsters as they literally condemned my mom's house because I turned it into a hoarder's apocalypse during my drug addiction. And everything I owned from the age of 25 forward was just thrown away. So my dad picks me up. He gives me $600. He brings me to Walmart and I bought a new life, which you can actually do at Walmart if you spend your money accordingly. Dropped me off at this recovery home. And my dad told me, he said, this is the only time he cried in his life. My dad is a tough, tough man, in law enforcement, a leader in that world. And he knew there's no way I was going to make it. And ironically, you have to get a job. They wouldn't let me do any political consulting. They wouldn't let me do anything that I wanted to do. But they would let me bartend and wait tables at a restaurant. So I got that job and I was determined to not let this stop me. So when I got out, I realized the scarlet letter that you wear being a drug addict, it's very hard. That's kind of the only job I was able to get. It didn't matter if I worked for the president. It didn't matter what I did. So I'm like, I'm going to start a communication firm and a PR firm, and I'm going to help these people like me start their own businesses, people that have something kind of going against them. And, so many people celebrate all their victories in life, but what it really amounts to is how we react to our failures. So I wanted to find people that cared about reacting to their failures in a positive way. And that small firm that I started during my drug addiction grew to be the fastest growing communication strategy firm in Chicago and then ultimately the nation. And my best friend that I got involved in drug addiction with when I was young, I tried getting him involved with all of my stuff. I'm living in downtown Chicago at this point, right across from the Sears Tower. I have the whole floor of an office building in River North, this beautiful firm with all these people that work in this communication strategy firm, everything you could want. It was like Ari Gold's firm in Entourage. For those of you, I'm the crazy person that's in there screaming about what's going on and clients all over the world. And my friend, they found him dead of heroin overdose. And I didn't know how to react to this, Angela. All of these things I learned in my life and how I've been able to make things happen for people. And there was nothing I could do here. I tried to stop it. So I reacted in an interesting way. I walked out to my office and I told everyone that we were moving our office to the west side of Chicago, which at the point was the most dangerous neighborhood in America. And why there is because on one of the blocks, 2 blocks away from my office is where I used to get heroin with my friend Josh. And I couldn't stop him, but I was going to stop it for everyone else. So I literally went on network television, fired all my clients, and did everything for free for the next 3 years for every brand that was a startup in Chicago that had a message could change. I learned so much, and I realized there was a technology disparity in the social services arena. So I started building technology, solar panels, systems to recycle water, and all these fascinating things, I guess. And I built this one machine that recycles water that was used in a commercial laundromat application. And the cannabis industry said, you know what, we need this because we have environmental restrictions. So a brand said, listen, we want you to move out to Las Vegas, implement this machine, and go from there. So many things happened from them that put me on this exciting path to where I'm at right now. And you know, this year, it's very hard to look at what are the mainstream credibility pieces that you gain in this polymathic life that we lead. You know, I don't have a PhD. I don't have any college degree for that matter, even though I have 120 some credit hours. I didn't even think I was an alumni at my school. And when I found out that I am, just because when you attend, you are, you know, a polymath reacts in a different way. So we built the largest reunion, Guinness Book of World Records. Of course, the pandemic postponed it to next year. So, you know, I'm heavily involved in a variety of things right now. But what I'm really excited about is the Institute for Real Growth. And, you know, here it is, the Institute of Real Growth. They named the IRG 100. And this would be the mainstream Fortune 100 leaders that are CMOs and CEOs of corporations that are leading in marketing across the world. And there's never been a more mainstream table ever to sit at. And, you know, I found out just about a week ago that I was selected for this. And it's fascinating because it's a real world credibility piece to all the craziness. So when people say you can't do anything, you know, the only reason you can't is because you realize these hurdles that are in your life, but you're in complete control of them. And I recommend going to the extreme because it's always right beyond this ironic wall that more or less defines my life. So sorry, I went on a long journey there to bring you through it, but we can touch on any of the the sections of it at any point you want, Angela.
No, I love that. You should see. Can you see in the chat? What an incredible story. You should make
I
it
have
into
not
a
looked. Yeah, I
movie.
will. Thank you.
Definitely. I mean, part of why I wanted you to explain, because I know your story, but I wanted other people to really understand just how polymathic you are, the great breadth and depth of experiences you've had, including being an entrepreneur, starting your own thing, working for other people, working in different industries, like really making an impact, and like the whole like drug addiction and jail story, which I think makes where you're at now that much more beautiful.
You know what? It's funny. You know, when I tell people I was a heroin addict, they, you know, nowadays restorative justice is in. They have a harder time believing I was a Republican Party strategist and accepting that. So go figure. That's the one thing. But there are plenty of videos online. Like, you know, there's a great radio show on BBC, and you know, and BBC was taking this serious early. You know, about people that are starting their lives over in the typecasting that comes from it. And polymaths in the typecasting that comes to them is a lot similar to what comes with being a drug addict or somebody that is starting over in life, because polymaths appear on a resume sense to be constantly starting over when really they may just be finding something new about themselves each time and adding it to that. So I always found it fascinating that there is something that I can identify with that makes sense. So
And the thing is too, it's not just that you identify this new part of yourself. In your, it takes some bravery to allow it. Like I may realize, oh, I think I'd like to build robots, but I work in marketing, so I'm not going to explore that. You know, like it would be easy to dismiss, but in your case, you didn't. You were an explorer of your own life.
I just tied it together. You know, that's the one thing. You know, I really think that it's just dynamic thinking, and if people just realize that they're capable of tying things together, and just because society says that this bucket, trust me, there's not that many people that can end up being a leader in the college Republicans and go on to be a leader in the Young Democrats. It's basically one of the most prohibited things you can do, and I did it. And it's not because I'm special, it's because society says it doesn't make sense. And most things that matter live behind that doesn't make sense wall. And if you explore that, you'll find you're capable of it too.
Yeah, I love it. All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story. I'm sure when it comes time for Q&A, people may have some questions for you. But whew, okay, back to sort of the practical organizational tips and tricks. So I want to fast forward to if you're an employee in an organization and you realize that you are naturally a polymathic, what can you do? What can you ask for? What can you advocate for? What can you choose to do to develop your own polymathy further? Or on the flip side, if you're a manager or leader in an organization, what can you sort of offer to your employees? And so I'm just going to go through a list of like 10 or 11 things. And then Chris, I want to ask you when I'm done sharing my list of ideas, if you have any other recommendations based on your own polymathic exploration. So clearly, if you're in a job and you want to become more polymathy means many learnings. So formal training or self-study or taking webinars or classes, clearly that is a very standard way of expanding what you know, learning. Job rotations is another way, taking short assignments, even if it were just for a few months within the same organization or even part-time, changing positions, career mobility, getting different experiences, whether it's longer term or shorter term. Self-directed work time. And what I mean by this is that you can kind of be an intrapreneur, not entrepreneur, but kind of intrapreneur in your organization by launching new projects or products. If you see a gap that you can fill, taking that on. So kind of you have your job that you're supposed to do, and then maybe you have some wiggle room and time that's available. So self-direct, like come up with some special projects that can showcase some of the skills that you want to exercise. And special projects in general. Shadowing, that's another thing you can do. If there's someone who has a certain skill set or certain role that you seem intrigued by or interested in, you think you might want to explore in the future, ask that person if you can follow them around for a day, attend their meetings, listen to their calls, see what it's like and see what you can learn from them. Having a mentor or a coach. Obviously, a mentor is more someone who can tell you about their experience. They can give you answers. A coach is someone who will ask questions for you to find your own answers, but it's another tool you can use to explore the different parts of your professional self. Of course, networking or collaborating with other professionals on projects is another way to learn. Reading, it's simple, but reading or even listening to audiobooks is a way that you can gain more skills, expand your toolkit. Here's a fun idea, organizational debates. Sometimes there may be opportunities or discussions taking place at work where it's sort of taboo to disagree. But what if we just said, hey, we're going to have a debate and bring the arguments, no hard feelings. Let's just get it out on the table and see what solutions rise to the top. So that could be something fun to do. Here's another fun idea, skills party. So polymaths tend to like to learn, and specialists, they may like to learn too. It may just be in a more narrow field, but what if employees shared about certain skills or information, not formal training, but sort of peer-to-peer training, share information, explain a process, share an example so colleagues can learn from one another and make it intentional. And the other thing I want to say too, that polymath, if you're a polymath or if you have polymaths working for you, they need task variety. It will drive a polymath crazy if they're doing routine work all day. So that's something to know. Okay, so there's some ideas for how to expand and develop your own polymathy or the polymathy of your employees. Chris, do you have any other ideas or tips based on your experience?
It's one of those things. I saw somebody in the comments drew attention that there's this kind of fear that comes from organizational leadership. And, I thought about this for a while, and Kane, who's in the group and listening today, she's helped me understand this just from listening into what I would consider to be a vast amount of my meetings throughout my life. And it's one of those things that we invoke almost a threatening fear, right? So when you have knowledge that may cross departments, it's not necessary. You sound like a know-it-all. Okay, frankly, I mean, that's generally what it is. My dad used to tell people when I was growing up, I would bring a girl home for the first time to meet my dad. And as I walked in, he would say to the girl for the first time, like, how did you fit in the doorway with Chris and his ego at the same time? So I've reacted to so many things in my life because of my father. And, I reacted to this, and it's almost like I went in the opposite direction, right? So I'm trying to make sure my ego's always in check and all of these things. So there really isn't even a way to approach it at the organizational level without the leaders understanding that there's a plausible alternative to the existing reality. And in the company I work in, I was pulled aside at the very beginning, and two of the people that were the founders said to each other in private, and then ultimately to me that, I'm just too disruptive, right? I want to do too many things. I'm violating too many of the policies and all of these things. And they were most likely right about every bit of it. And but they gave me the chance to prove myself. And for a real polymath that wants to be accepted, you have to prove yourself always. There's never a shortcut. And oftentimes it means actually doing full projects and everything on spec, doing something that makes you stand out and actually be different. Otherwise, you're just a name and an excuse for somebody that's not able to manifest results. Because in business and in organizations, you always have to manifest results.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you touched upon something, Chris, which I heard from so many of the people I interviewed, which is, and I know I said it before, but I just want to underscore it again, is that if a polymath is in a role that's really suited more to a specialist, so it's important to get the job match right, it can be very disruptive because that polymath is going to want to shake things up, change things, make some improvements. And sometimes the employers will just say, they'll feel like you're being annoying, just do your job. We don't want you to do things different. Just do what you're told. We don't, they might not want to do things differently. They might not want new ideas. Like you said, it may come across as being too disruptive. So it really is a real challenge that polymaths face sometimes if they're in an organization who doesn't really appreciate polymaths or maybe even have an awareness of that sort of way of living and working and thinking.
Where I'm at right now, Angela, I think this is fascinating. I came in and it's a publishing company, right? So I've never actually been involved with publishing anything. But, I've learned a lot in my time. So when I came in, with zero knowledge and I started contributing in the way that I do, even if it's free or otherwise, no matter what you do, it is saying that what exists now is not adequate. And that is, in to some degree, offensive to people. And I've had to learn this. It didn't necessarily make sense. Like, when I was younger and even now I'd go to people like, why can't I just volunteer and do something? I never thought who gets hurt from that. And people do, so I've had to learn, and Sensi Media Group has taught me so much, mainly by giving me the opportunity to literally build an entire side of a company that coexists with the existing brand to facilitate the brand's growth around the unique models of learning and unique models of training and everything to bring more polymathic, cognitive, flexible people into the game. And it doesn't matter what the resume, that's the beauty about it. When companies are looking, I noticed that Jennifer from Chicago brought in, that's why she started her own brand. And, oftentimes I would as well, Jennifer, I agree with that. I start brands all the time. I had a great brand in downtown Chicago, as I mentioned. But the truth of the matter is, when you find a company that allows you to be the person that you are, where we feel trapped, only able to start our own brands, but inside of an organization, you find out that not only do you get the stability, but you actually make change in these companies, and it blows them out of the water because it's more efficient. And the things you learn as an entrepreneur, those are things that you don't necessarily learn in school. So that's where you have a definite leg up. So I appreciate that.
Yeah. So part of what I just want to underscore as well, and this relates to another sort of theme I found in my research, is that this just more generally, even whether it's inside of work or outside of work, the social relationships, the how you navigate those, and the storytelling, like how you explain what you're capable of, it can be threatening, or people can think you're bragging or boasting, or it can be negatively received, even though in a workplace setting, you would think adding more value, giving more, doing more, bringing more to the table would be appreciated. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's not. So we've talked about how difficult it can be. I want to talk about, the flip side. Like, okay, what can organizations do? What can leadership do to help retain polymathic talent, assuming they see it, they value it? And so here are a few ideas I have. Appreciate their skill set, talk about it, notice it, put them in jobs and give them projects that are suited to their skill sets. Another thing I heard from the people I interviewed is they really value freedom and flexibility. It's the reason that they're polymathic to begin with, is because they value variety, freedom, flexibility. And so in the workplace, they want freedom and flexibility as well. And so what that means is, don't micromanage a polymath. Give them guardrails, give them things to do, check in with them, give them resources. But if you micromanage a capable, intelligent professional, they're not going to like that. I would, if I were managing people who I knew were polymathic, I would also just encourage them to step into that identity, because I think there's something really powerful that can happen when you absorb and own and step into an identity, rather than kind of not really being aware of it. And then also, if I were in a leadership position with polymathic talent, I would want to create systems and opportunities to support polymathic contributions. Like, could we create a community of practice for polymaths in our organization, or have idea parties where we just brainstorm, polymaths and specialists together maybe, or have innovation competitions where we encourage people to come up with new ideas, and we have a rubric and a panel who judges them, and awards, or just awards in general. Rewarding excellent innovative work that gets done out of the confines of their job description, because polymaths probably will stretch and push their job beyond what the job description is, because they have all these skills and talents and typically really want to add value and use their talent. Let's see. And I mentioned micromanagement. If you're in a leadership position, be a macro manager, be a big picture manager, focus on the results, the bottom line. So those are a few ideas I have for how to kind of elicit the goodness of the polymath, even though there are some challenges in the workscape. And so, Chris, when you look back on your prior work roles where you were not an entrepreneur, so you were working for someone else, what helped you stay there? Like, what kept you engaged and motivated to stay as a polymath working for someone else?
The only actual working for somebody else I have in my life outside of modern era is in politics, in which I worked for a series of different political and government leaders. And it's fascinating because, in my life, I've met 5 US presidents, and it's not necessarily that I'm saying that as some sort of badge of honor. That means that you were in 5 completely different scenarios from different political parties to be there. And that means there's a lot of chaos in your life to manage that. I was not a full-time government staffer, and, working with these independent candidates and working with leaders on I guess, the first doorway of their real leadership in life is fascinating. And what I learned is that it was more accepted, in the Republican Party, it's very nepotistic, right? So nepotism is everywhere. You have to, it takes forever to move to the top of the apparatus. They have a phenomenal organizational structure, but they don't necessarily have the people. Fast forward to the Democrat Party, I actually got fairly high in the national organization fairly quick. They have all the people, and they don't necessarily have the organizational structure to match all the people that they have. So if they actually sat down and worked together, the whole world would be different. And that's very much similar to what it is when you're a polymath entering into a company. You always have to look at the fact that you are representing the third side. Always. And when you're coming into the position where you have the status quo, and then you have the traditional new ideas, and then you have the person that's coming in that seems to be able to tie together maybe one of the ideas that the CEO had years ago but weren't able to implement it now. When you're able to tie it in, you sound like you're a know-it-all, and it couldn't be possible. So luckily in politics, it's all subjective. So when I was able to use that as my resume going forward, it's very hard to say, hey, listen, I worked with George W. Bush. Oh, he doesn't. I worked with Barack Obama. Sooner or later, you're going to get him. There's only a couple options where you win people over. But what I realized in companies, you really have to find a leader that believes in allowing a leader to lead differently, because this is what it represents. If you're leading differently in large corporations, you have to have a standard. You have to treat people the same as employees, right? And people that work for you. So allowing different set of rules or standards for one thing's not necessarily allowed. So the first challenge of a polymath is to figure out how to work with your leader in order to be effective. Otherwise, all your polymathic skills don't mean anything.
Hmm. Yeah, and Chris, you've touched on leadership a couple times now during our discussion, which I want to dive into a little bit more. In my view, polymaths could be very, very well suited to leadership roles because if they've had all the, especially if they're leading a diverse team. If you're a leader of a very narrow specialized team, I don't think being a polymath is necessarily needed for that group. But if you have a leader who has a bunch of different divisions under them or just a hodgepodge of different types of functions under them, then having someone who knows those different functions, who's had experience in them, who speaks multiple languages, who has networks in different sort of functional areas, who has a larger toolkit, it just makes sense because then they can connect and speak and understand with their diverse staff. I will say though, not all polymaths are suited to lead. I don't want to give the impression that I think, oh, if you're a polymath, you should be a leader, because there are plenty of polymaths who are, who that's the last thing they would want to do. You know, they may be very introverted or sort of more just like working alone and don't want the pressure of the leadership role. But some polymaths love that kind of thing, and it really helps them sort of tap into their capacities and capability. So what about for you? What do you feel like you, in your case, Chris, do you feel like your polymathy helps you be a better leader when you have a team of people working under you?
You know, I started in this company in literally the lowest position on the totem pole in the company. It's the only way in. There's no way. That's what was such a challenge for me. My resume didn't matter, but I wanted to work for this brand. But everybody starts where it is. So there's not even a model for ascending in the hierarchy. So I came to the company. I said, listen, I basically did a Jerry Maguire type memo that I went to all the executives and said, here's all the gaps as I see them. And they're like, who is this guy out of the Las Vegas market who just started as an associate publisher in the company and writing a manifesto to the corporate leadership about the changes? Now, of course, I wrote in the proverbial, I don't mean anything bad by this or whatever language. It didn't work. And then still, it wasn't enough for my resume to matter then. And I think that challenge and the willingness to be relentless is what drove. And the company itself was set up in a way where it was all focused on sales. They have the #1 award-winning magazine in the industry, but it was still all focused on sales. Realizing it gave me the opportunity to present a counterbalancing institution to run opposite of that sales department and craft away. So they gave me an opportunity to lead. And now I lead a vast number of people that have some of the most creative talents and a diversity of things that I've ever worked with. And it's really that you have to find a way if you want to lead unique people and you want to have outcomes that are different than the status quo, you need to actually make sure that it meets the status quo standard to be able to go beyond the status quo, because otherwise you'll never be given the opportunity. So, you know, that's the one thing. Looking for the opportunities, finding a way to allow the leaders to realize that you're going to not hurt things with the opportunity, and then show how afterwards it's going to make change in the future. And then you're going to be given the real opportunity to make change like I did.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I want to real quick go to the chat. Jennifer said it seems that success equals polymathy plus people skills. I think that's a good summary of it. You do need the social, like being able to navigate socially and interpersonally is really important, especially if you're working with or for other
You know,
people.
I think that's fascinating. There, I have my failure points, right? I'm a politician I guess birth, for that matter, since I started so young. So I have that for me. And like I mentioned earlier, growing up, not necessarily being the coolest kid and the most athletic kid caused me to develop communication skills. But you know, one thing that my polymathy always forces in my mind logistically is building buffers from failure points. And when I get beyond those preventative walls, I'm like a zero. I'm not good back there. You know, I get erratic. I react horribly, just like most people would when they get frustrated at the beginning. But I've been storing it up to that point. So it's very key to finding people in your direct leadership circle, like I have, that fill those gaps. And then you can focus your energy on the peaks not the valleys. Because if we focus all our energy just fixing the valleys, we'll never make the peaks matter. We'll never be able to drive real change in corporations. So yes, it does require people skills, but if you don't personally have them, there's nothing that says you can't have a sidekick, a person next to you, a chief of staff, or somebody that helps you carry that message across. And you just have to know that that's who you have to work with too. And that's the hard thing. You have to be able to trust people that are close to you, which is not
Yeah.
as easy to do as you think.
Let's shift gears a little bit now, Chris, and because we're running up, we're running out of time, so we've got to prioritize how we spend our last few minutes before we go to the breakout rooms. But I want to talk a bit about entrepreneurship, because you had your own firm in Chicago, like you mentioned, and it sounded like in your experience, you kind of created that opportunity because you were having difficulty with, with the jail experience, like getting a gig. So you created a gig for yourself for that reason. However, for a lot of polymaths, the reason they go and do an entrepreneurial venture is because they just find organizations too stifling. They don't want to be a specialist, and there's so much pressure to specialize and sort of exist in that box. I want to share a quote from one of the people I interviewed. I called her Wendy. And she said she became an entrepreneur in order to use more of her talents. She said, being a polymath, quote, has made my professional life richer and more complicated. My employers distinctly have not known how to leverage my skill set, which is why I became an entrepreneur. I'm not willing to stay in a place that wants to put me in a box and only asks for that part of me. So I think there's a huge opportunity for organizations to rethink how they use talent. So, Chris, I know your reason for becoming an entrepreneur was a little bit different than Wendy's reason, but once you were in an entrepreneurial position with your own firm, did you feel like you were able to use like different parts of your skill set more? Does this fit with your experience of being an entrepreneur, that you were able to be more of a polymath at work?
At the beginning, I did all of the work myself that our company set off to be. We were a marketing firm, so I taught myself how to do websites. I taught myself the formalities of press releases and all of these things that I didn't necessarily learn in the positions I was in prior. But it was when you run your own business, you'd be blown away how much of your time you're dealing with the operational aspects of it or the administrative aspects of it. And I found out, believe it or not, I was a horrible delegator. Here I am. I win all these leadership awards. Look at my LinkedIn. You'll see all this list. And to this day, it doesn't matter, because I still am not a good delegator. Because in my mind, what I feel is that when I delegate something, I'm more or less saying that I'm either too lazy to do it myself, or that I'm incompetent at a textbook definition, or that I simply don't know how to do it. And I didn't want for people to think that. I don't want, especially when people found out, when I was younger, that I was a prodigy, right? Then they treat you different, and I want people to treat me the same. So I find that it's more of a defense mechanism and how I've approached it than anything. But we can get into more of that, because I don't want to take up too much time, because these breakout rooms sound interesting, Angela.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing, Chris. I guess we're out of time. I had so much more that I had hoped to get to, but I think we really touched upon the highlights. And Chris, your story was so fascinating. Thank you for sharing that with everybody. I guess just to sort of wrap, because we've been going for an hour already. I just want to say that it's not easy being a polymathic person in the age of specialization, in a professional context, especially, because the narrative is specialized. And if you don't want to do that, if you don't want to squish into a box, it can be a bit of an uphill battle. But I want to share one of the quotes that one of the people I interviewed, what she said to me. Let me read it to you. So someone I called Caroline said, building my career, I had to think much harder about how to get a career that was going to be fulfilling for me. I think my greatest personal success, I still view it as my greatest personal success, is succeeding in doing that, and not just languishing in the standard career that I had started with, because it would have been easy to go with that, because there was a blueprint and because it was safe. So part of what I want to leave you with, and maybe you guys can talk about this in the breakout room, is, taking ownership for your professional experiences. In general, polymaths curate and write and author their own life stories, their own learning journeys very purposefully, and thought is, there's some chance, there's some incidental learning that comes up, but for the most part, in the age of specialization, polymaths are brave adventurers, and that includes in your career. How will you take ownership for your experience? If you're not happy in how your career is going, what can you do to find a path that will feel fulfilling and authentic and not just languish, like Caroline said, in the default? So specialize on being a polymath, Tom. That's funny. There you go. All right. So why don't Shrikant, I know you're going to tell us about the breakout rooms. Why don't you guys, when you get out in the breakout rooms, talk about what came up for you in this discussion? What has your professional experience been? Have you felt like you were able to bring all of your talent to work, or has some of it been left on the back burner? And if so, what can you do moving forward to get a career that would feel very fulfilling and rewarding for you?
Wonderful, folks. So now it's time for breakout rooms. What we're going to do is that we're going to do breakout rooms now, and when we'll be doing breakout rooms for 20 minutes so that we can discuss these ideas. When you come back, we'll have a chance to share your takeaways as well as ask a question if you want. Okay, and we'll keep track of all the questions, all the takeaways, and then Angela, Chris, and I will put it all together and respond to everything at that point. All right, so I'm starting the breakout rooms now. All right, folks, welcome back. All right, it's time for takeaways. You can talk about the ideas presented by Angela. You can talk about the amazing life of Chris. You can talk about what you got in the breakout rooms. You can talk about your thoughts in takeaways. You can also ask a question, and we're going to collect all the questions, and I'm going to call upon you to ask those questions at the end, but go ahead and put the questions, say your question, and then we will go ahead from that. You can take between 1 to 2 minutes to talk about whatever you want to say. I'm going to call on people I see in the order I see them in Zoom, and we will go from there. So it's going to be Barry, Francoise, and Jennifer next. Barry, what's your takeaway?
So my takeaway is there is commonality, whether you work for a corporation, the government, or like Chris did, he worked for the political system, that polymaths can apply the same principles of digging deep in a specialty and using that to dig laterally to other sides. That is the key. And as you look at what the company needs and what the government needs, or whatever political system, and you look at your own values and you dig deep to match your passions with their needs and their mandate, you are on the way to success. I guarantee it.
Beautiful, beautiful, Barry. Next up is going to be Francoise, Jennifer, and Linda. Francoise.
Well, what came out really, and I think I'm more or less a polymath, that when I was employed, doing all kinds of jobs, I've never been the best employees. I played a few games and I could adapt, and I always dare. It was daring which got me a lot of temporary jobs in any country over the world. But now that I'm an entrepreneur and I'm the one who's hiring, what I'm really looking for is a win-win situation, understand who I'm working with, and having them knowing themselves first, and being able to give the best they can give, creating a good team. And it's all linked around communication. And I've learned a lot by doing what I did, but now I'm on the other side of the game, and I think I have a very good team, and I'm very happy with what I have now.
That's a good side to be on. Next up is
much better, but it's a long way to learn.
Yes. Next up is Jennifer, Linda, and Jeff. Jennifer.
There we go. Sure. So I'm going to crib something that Jeff brought up during the breakout. And first, I wanted to address, I think it was Barry's, I really liked the analogy of digging laterally to other sides, because I think that is the core of polymathy. It's seeing those connections and those larger underlying patterns that allow you to make those breakthrough connections. So that is super cool. And I'm going to crib that for the rest of my life. So I really appreciated what Jeff had to say in our breakout group about soft skills and the ability to work with people as being really important. That was something that Chris, Jeff said you demonstrated that in, just how you were able to tap into different people. I struggled with that for a long time until I've been through quite a bit of counseling, and that's helped improve my soft skills. Because sometimes those of us who are pretty intelligent are not often soft skill gifted. But the book that Jeff mentioned was Conversational Intelligence by Judith Glaser. I'm going to pop it in the, sorry, I'm cribbing your, I thought this was really good and I really want to read this book. So
You can do the putting in the chat later.
Yes. Later. Okay. Okay.
Okay. You can go ahead and put in parallel. I just don't want to take time. That's it. Next up is going to be Linda, Jeff, and Martin. Linda.
I'm curious if there's a particular age by which a parent can realize that a child is going to be a polymath so that they can perhaps enhance their education.
Wonderful. So I'll put that as a question once we are done with all the takeaways. Next up is going to be Jeff, Martin, and Mike. Jeff.
So yeah, we did have a great conversation in our breakout room, and I really was impressed by two things that were very powerful in Chris's story. In addition to all the gifts of his intellectual and polymath abilities, two things that I saw Chris doing was, one, I saw him we're exercising tremendous emotional and conversational intelligence, the ability to really not underestimate the significance of people's egos and create ways of working with them and structuring situations and ideas and approaches in such a way that others really got how they would win as well by supporting him in those endeavors. And then second, I really saw in Chris's story kind of an evolution towards a greater purpose, towards making the world a better place with all of his endeavors. And I think that evolution in terms of the quality of purpose, as well as the exercise of emotional and conversational intelligence, were really powerful aspects of his story, in addition to his remarkable polymath abilities.
Thank you, Jeff. It's just amazing story, Chris. So just, I second that wholeheartedly. Next up is Martin, Mike, and Kevin.
Hi, everyone. I want to ask Chris, let's say that I'm polymath too, and what thing polymath are missing? What do you think that let's say we are missing? Which is the elephant in the room that we are not seeing in all this? Excellent.
We'll come to all the questions. I'll put that as a question from you. Okay. Next up is going to be Mike, Kevin, and Johnny.
I'm always wonder how deep you should go between polymath and specialist. It would seem that Michelangelo had enough bandwidth that he could really become an expert in those fields. And we have people that I've seen people in my travels that don't have that bandwidth and maybe use that not specializing in something has limited their effectiveness, and what the thresholds are for how to determine how deep to go and how broad to be.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Next up is, let me see, I lost track here. Sorry about that. Okay, I'm going to call on AJ, followed by David and Donna. AJ. AJ, are you there? Okay, I'll go to David. David.
I mean, just reemphasizing what Jeff was saying, that the ability to communicate across different people and find win-win situations. I mean, Françoise also mentioned that it's really a matter of taking these skills and, as Chris was saying, balancing. I mean, that people have different benefits, different, and mixing their own capabilities with others, finding other people to, I mean, not just win-win situations, but also to complement their own skills, and using the polymath to understand these various areas, understand their own limitations, and how to combine together the best efforts of everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, David. Next up is Donna, Faye, and Kane. Donna.
I'm always fascinated by these meetups, especially the topic of polymath. So thank you everyone for all your contribution. My question is, besides being an entrepreneur, is there particular environments that are more welcoming to polymaths? Because it definitely, I feel this specialization, and it can be very frustrating when you're in the corporate culture that just wants you to be in this one little role in this box. Luckily I've been fortunate enough that somehow, even in these big corporations, somehow I've maintained that generalist that I love, but sometimes it's a harder battle to keep that generalist. People just, they don't want you to be that generalist.
Thank you, Donna. I'll put your question in. Next up is going to be Faye, followed by Kevin. Faye.
Sure. So apologies, I joined a little late. I had a family meeting prior to my question. And if you've already gone through this, you don't have to go through it again. But my question for you would be, in navigating a corporate culture, just how would you, what are some tips and advice you can provide on sort of not threatening that status quo culture?
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Faye. Next up, and questions can be asked as many times, because all good questions will produce amazing new new parts of the answer, new parts of the puzzle. So this is a great question. Thank you. Next up is Kevin, Laura, and M. Kevin.
Well, Polymath is about dynamic thinking, finding multiple potentials by digging, literally use the gold age and link everything together. We use the same brain to apply it to everything, built by the brain built by one tiny block neuron. So I think we need to trust and common agreement about the tools, techniques we use as Polymath, then earn the trust from the across the culture. By the way, in organization, Polymath is real resource in the team, in the organization. Polymath mindset, learn, can help cross organization. A logic example, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Laura, M, and Michael, Captain Future. Laura.
Okay, I got something entirely different. There's a kid that I met on my building, and he was kind of a street kid and went to prison when he was a teenager, pretty much of his teenage years. He said to get through prison life, he did a lot of reading. And when he left prison, he knew that he never wanted to go back there in any way. He realized that the only way he was going to make it when he got out of there was to become his own man. He knew he'd never get a decent job with his record. And so he decided to become an entrepreneur. He had nothing in his pocket. And he's been doing it ever since. He's created businesses. He learned how to do the stock market. So he does that kind of thing. Anything that comes by that seems like something good, he jumps on it. That's how he plays the game. He's never had a job in an office. He's never been seen as a specialist. And he sort of is, I don't know, he became attached to me. He likes talking to me. He thinks I provide help to him in his endeavor of creating himself. Certainly he's a polymath, and he's not aware of that. And he's looking to me for a lot of guidance. And so I figure now I have to nurture this polymath, and I don't know enough about how to do that. So how do I find how to nurture a growing polymath?
Wonderful. A fantastic story, Laura, and fantastic question. So we'll get to it, and thank you. Next up is M, followed by Michael. M.
Hi, I just want to say thank you to Barry and Chris for sharing their experience in the breakout room. And I'm very lucky to stumble up on this topic of polymath because I never heard of it before until now. And I'm very interested in where my career path right now. And I'm very excited to learn more about it.
Thank you, M. Next up is Michael and Joel. Michael. Okay, we go to Joel. Joel.
Thank you very much for this presentation and all these ideas. I was just about to type a thank you because I have to go to another meeting, but I really enjoyed it, and I hope we'll hear more from all of you. And Chris, I hope you learn to change your Zoom name.
Next up is going to be, thank you. Next up is going to be, let's go ahead and, now I have a bunch of questions, but if Chris or Angela want to respond to anything, any kind of takeaways, you can do that. And then we are going to go into questions. So we have questions from, it's going to be Martin, Donna, then Faye, Laura, and Linda. So we got 5 questions, but if you want to give your comments or any kind of takeaways yourself, you're welcome to do that at this point. Chris first.
Just a takeaway in general, I heard all the questions now, and I'd be very excited to answer as many as I can. But the best advice I can give for anybody that feels you're a polymath and you want to be taken seriously, right? And that's the most important thing, because in order to have effective outcomes, you need to be taken seriously. And it's more or less 3 rules that I live by. First one, never take the victim stance. And as a polymath, sometimes it's easy because you may be bullied because you like weird things, or you may be told as a person that's a jack of all trades, but a specialist of none, or any of those things. But no matter what, you never take the victim stance. Rule number 2, you never cast blame, because you see, the moment that you start blaming things versus taking blame yourself is the moment that you are removed away from the ability to solve it. Evidenced by the fact that at one point in my company, I didn't feel that I was being utilized enough in society. I have these weird notions in Chicago, and Chicago always needs change and positive stuff. So we put together this marketing campaign where it was literally blame Chris, in which I would allow people to write things, blame me for their garbage being collected late. I don't care, because I knew that if I knew what upset people, that I would at least have the opportunity to try to solve it. And rule number 3, when it comes down to communicating with people from a polymathic standpoint, because you often have so many things that you want to talk about, it's about finding your mutual truth. right? I know Jennifer brought up this point, like, how do you navigate in some of these environments, with these things? And one of the first things I would do is start talking to her about photography, because I love photography. And I noticed behind her on her wall is a whole series of photography. And she either likes that, or she likes design, or she likes whatever. I can go through a whole laundry list, but I can promise you that people probably don't know that unless she tells them, right? So finding the mutual truth takes you away from ever lying to somebody. Even though I'm a politician, Kane will tell you, I'm not about lying at all. I think that authenticity is what matters. So you find the truth. And if you can't find the truth with somebody, then you're a waste of their time in communication, or you don't know enough, and you shouldn't be marketing yourself as a polymath. So I always find the truth with someone in communication. But with those three things, I think that kind of lays the framework for how I go day to day, but I'll answer more inside the questions. And I appreciate all of you today. It was fantastic.
Chris, that was brilliant. I think that was amazing, because what it does is that it puts all the responsibility in you. You are taking the responsibility for doing things, and then you're trying to look outside and seeing what is possible. What intersections are there that you can use, and you have a greater ability of seeing intersections because you are operating along beautifully put, all 3 points. So folks, now we're going to go to questions. So we'll start with Martin. I've organized it in a way. So we'll first be talking about Martin's question about what polymaths are missing, then Donna, then Faye, Laura, and then finally Linda. Okay, so Martin, can you restate your question?
Yes, Chris, maybe it's like a general and more reflexive question, but otherwise, even if the question is not very precise, what do you think about what we are missing, or which is the point that we are missing as a polymath, or which is the elephant that we are not seeing? Where guides you that question?
For me, it's one of those things. I've always been motivated by, I've never been really motivated by money. I can tell you that. I'm more or less motivated by creating things I can be proud of. And my mom at a very young age let me take that on as a passion in life, where she didn't necessarily hold me to the standard of what other kids were held to, where they're going around saying, I'm going to be a doctor or a lawyer. Both my parents were in law enforcement, and neither of them tried to get me to go into law enforcement. And it was my mom who worked extra hours in the single parent home that I grew up in, in law enforcement, which is not the kind of job you want to work extra hours in, and sometimes in towns that are crazy, just so I would have the opportunity to go to Space Academy. But best believe that when I knew how much overtime that she worked so I can go to Space Academy level 1, I wrote the longest dissertation you possibly can to get a scholarship to Space Academy level 2. And I may have never gone if it wasn't for wanting to make right by my mom, who did that extra work. So my foundation is always in something that is real. And it's very important, because one thing I found is this is I'm very hard to motivate. Okay. Companies try to dangle big paychecks in front of me. Kane will tell you, even when we were basically broke at one point, I wouldn't take big dollar jobs because I didn't believe in it. That is very important, because the moment that you don't stay true to yourself is the moment you give up all that matters about the things that tie together your mind and brain to help others. And what I realized is that, if I wanted exceptional outcomes, I came to grips with the fact that exceptions had to be made. And there's really only one difference between things that are extraordinary and ordinary, and that's the extra. And that means you have to do extra work. You have to spend extra time. You have to go extra above and beyond if you want people to believe in you when already you have the obstacle of not being a specialist in front of them. So I'll gladly work in the future here with anybody I can, through anything I'm involved with, to help find these paths. But it's much easier just being true to yourself than it is not being.
Wonderful. Next up is going to be Donna, Faye, Laura, and Linda. Donna, can you restate your question?
Sure. So my question was around, besides being an entrepreneur, are there environments that are, I guess, more welcoming to polymaths? And then I have this other question. that I find maybe more recently, and I don't know if this is just because of my age, I've always felt like, what is my purpose? And I don't know if that's because I'm a polymath. I just keep saying, I don't know. I'm like, all right, I came here on this planet and I know I've got a purpose, but I feel like I just like my whole life going, you know, having so many interests that it's like, I'm just not, I'm not quite there yet. You know, I love doing this, I love doing that. And I've done all these things and I'm like, and I don't know if it's that specialist that's like shouting at me like, well, you got to have this, you know, one special purpose that you came here for. So I don't know. That's kind of my question, I guess.
I think it's a great and honest question, Donna. You know, my advice is this, right? You know, to the answer to question one is the answer to question two. And, you know, the entrepreneurial world is not the only place that this, matter of fact, that I have done everything in entrepreneurship. I even taught graduate school entrepreneurship, undergraduate entrepreneurship at university, right? So I understand that, but I'm not much of a fan of the traditional entrepreneurial mind. I like that it allows me to do one thing always, and that's solving problems. And you see, the world of solving problems, especially problems that aren't necessarily that sexy. And when I mean that, not necessarily things like solving water or breast cancer or things that are already out with tons of support. They need as much support as they can get, but there are plenty of other things out there that need solutions from diversified minds. And, you know, it's one of those things that you find your purpose with the solution and when you see what it does for people, you know, and that's the one thing that drives me is when I actually see that I help people solve things themselves that matter. And to me, what matters is things that have three wins. And it's a win for the party that you're involved with, a win for your personal mission, and then a win for the world. And without those three things, you run into a challenge because unfortunately that means that there's a lopsided balance. So I'm confident, Donna, that regardless of whatever age it is, your experience is not something that's necessarily attached to your age. And that means that if you have the ability to gain this experience, that means you're gaining new stuff every single day. And that being the case, finding problems in your neighborhood, finding problems that you solve from A to Z. And that's what people don't understand. I always find it novel when people like write all the letters to like town and say, hey, listen, I've got these potholes here and there. This is broken. Government works at some of the slowest pace of all time. And on top of it, you can't even like volunteer to fix anything in government, right? But I did find it effective when somebody got on the national news for filling that pothole themselves up front. And then another person started doing artscapes inside of potholes. And pretty soon the news got attention to it. And that one person that started at first, they solved the problem and started a revolution. And trust me, it makes it much harder for the government to rationalize why they can't fill potholes. That could be you, Donna.
Excellent. Next up is Faye. Faye, can you restate your question?
Yes. So my question was just in a corporate environment where status quo is the norm and is what's expected, how do you manage those relationships with managers or peers who see you and your ability as a threat?
You know, the fact that you're on this group right now tells me that I don't know if you're a manager or not, but you're at least a leader because it takes an element of personal leadership to be in meetups like this. And the rules that I have for leadership are fairly clear. And that is when you use pronouns like I and me. I'm not sure if they're pronouns, but I'm calling them pronouns today. And in all leadership environments, you only use I and me under instances of failure. Okay. And where you use words like the team, we, are, is in all instances of success. And when you, whether you're inside the corporate hierarchy, want to get something done that defies the status quo, you need to come to grips with the fact that if it's not your job, that you need to pass credit to the person above you. First, it needs to solve real problems. But as long as you're willing to give up credit to the people that empowered you to do that, then they will know that it probably makes sense to empower you to do it again. And pretty soon, the person that was only allowing you to do it because they got credit you're going to end up being their boss. So always be true to yourself and realize that it's not just you in the corporate environment. Choices that you make that defy the status quo kind of create a ripple. That's one of the things that's interesting about government. How can the government with such a rigid structure, like in the military, be so effective with things like special forces and special operations, where you have to do things at the last minute with no preparation? And it's because somewhere along the way, special operations was something that was allowed to be different because they got exceptional results, and they were willing to give away all the credit, so much so that some of them are never even drawn attention to forever working into that, because they know it was for the better interest of the brand. And trust me, any leader of yours that realizes that your ideas and everything aren't just for personal gain, but they're done for the right reasons, they'd be a foolish person not to listen to you as you grow in that corporate environment.
Wonderful.
Yeah, but can I add something there too? Chris, I loved your answer. I think that's a great answer.
By all means.
Another like idea, because it's not easy being smart, capable in an environment that just wants to keep the status quo and trying to help elevate that group when, you know, the leadership may feel threatened. And I think one way of doing it, just an idea, is instead of coming from it, here's what I think, here's what I suggest, is forming it somehow, coming up with a way to ask questions, doing it in a question format, maybe less threatening than a statement format. You know what I mean? And of course, body language and tone of voice and that sort of thing, there is a way to sort of maybe soften the delivery so it's not quite so threatening, and just plant the seed, maybe give it time, come back to it later and see what happens. Chris, did you want to add anything else?
As I mentioned and Barry was sharing how he spent 31 years working in the federal government, and that's amazing, especially with some of the work they did. But, you know, eventually they allowed him to have some flexibility and start building his own contractor teams and everything. And that is a hard thing to get done in the government, right? And I asked him, I'm like, Barry, why did this change? And Barry drew attention to the fact that, you know, it was because of failures, right? It was because he was looking at things that needed solutions. He was able to prove that when people ultimately got fired for doing things wrong, he was able to fill the gaps, and they gave him a little bit more responsibility. And I think oftentimes we try to get people to say yes, which means we don't do enough work beforehand to remove the possibility for them to say no. And that's where, when you're in a corporate environment and you know there's rigid environment, or you don't want to put anyone at threat, you want to make sure that you do your homework and understand the implications it has everywhere, because the more you are prepared, the better it is that you're going to get the result, and make it very hard for them to say no. That allows you to have a little bit more relaxed approach than the overly aggressive approach that I normally take.
Wonderful. So Laura had this inspiring story of the person who was in jail, read and has started entrepreneurship, and she was wondering what kind of resources, how do you nurture such a person?
I one thing about me, and anybody that Googles will see that I really own the fact that I got in trouble. It wasn't a PR stunt. It was really for my own benefit. When you grow up in politics, you kind of not only live a jaded perception, but you're painting a picture. You sell human beings versus selling widgets, and oftentimes reality does not meet what's behind closed doors, but it's still your job, and it really weighs on you. And with that, you're never real. I mean, I got all the way to the point of being on the national board of the College Republicans, and I wasn't even someone that could recite the party's motto, which is crazy to think how far you can go in an authentic role without truly being authentic. But then after I lost everything, I went to jail and everything was thrown away, and I was literally homeless. And I started being truthful and understanding, hey, listen, I've got this thing now. I mean, I was homeless, I was a drug addict, and it's either I can try to hide that and the absorbent amount of extra work, or I was going to own that. And I promise you, the fact that this person's an entrepreneur, it's not necessarily because that's the only option. It's because if you think about it, oftentimes people that went into drug addiction or something, that's a hard thing to maintain. Okay. Oftentimes people turn to crime just to be able to financially support it. But I can tell you this, that after spending enough time in jail, if I was starting a Wall Street brokerage, the best place I'm going to go is on the street, and I'm going to find the person that's hustling drugs on the corner, because the same skill set there would make them an unbelievable stockbroker if they were given the right licensing, given the right training, because it's that ability to sell. It's that ability to see opportunity for other people where they felt there was no opportunity for themselves and that's all they had. That's what needs to be focused on. You know, so with your friend that you have that you live by there, you know, it's about finding the room where other entrepreneurs want to be. It's about finding that AA and NA meeting where people are starting with nothing and help them get to the pathway of entrepreneurship. Your friend is going to find resolve in passing that gift that he was able to apply to himself and understanding how to become an entrepreneur after facing a recovery period like that. And that is going to be enough to elevate and give him inspiration. Like I said earlier, it's impossible to motivate me, but if you give people inspiration, they become self-motivating. And that's what we need to do for your friend.
Can I just add to Laura, thank you so much for sharing that story. I just want to say, you know, a lot of times when we think about polymaths, we think of highly successful, accomplished polymaths, but polymaths can exist anywhere. Polymathic approaches and ways of and actually being in jail where you have tons of time to read and maybe classes to take and different types of people you can learn from. You know, it is an opportunity for people to develop their own polymathy while even in jail. But I think it's beautiful that you want to nurture this growing polymath. How do you do it? I think just, you know, being supportive of him, exploring what he's curious about, what he wants to learn about, talking about polymathy, mentioning the words, you know, helping him gain self-awareness. Those are a few ideas, and I know we're getting short on time. And I think Linda and Mike had two remaining questions.
Just a second. It's going to be Linda. I don't think Mike had a question, but Jeff has a question.
Okay.
So we're going to go with Linda, followed by Jeff. Linda, go ahead.
I was wondering if we can identify a polymath in a child and about how early so that we can enhance their education.
You know, with me, if you look at a pattern or a lack thereof, so I would get straight A's, and then one semester I got straight F's. Now, trust me, if you ever want to get your parents' attention, that's one way to do it. And, you know, so that ultimately nowadays results in some sort of ADD medicine or something like that, when really it could be just the desire of opportunity beyond the status quo in that classroom. And there's never a time too early, and there's never a time too late, because you see, it's about identifying it and finding a pathway to facilitate it. And it's not necessarily a money thing. See, money is often a barrier for many things, because often you have a smart child. If the public school system has limited programs, it's going to cost money out of pocket. But believe it or not, volunteer opportunities is what my mom got me involved with. She would bring me with to volunteer, and she would do a lot of things with the church and a lot of things like that. And that's what really honed both my people skills and my ability to solve problems. And that's why the ability to solve problems is something you could recognize at a very young age, whether it's through puzzles or whether it be through little things that they would do around the house, like me fixing electrical sockets before I even knew how to use a screwdriver. It's in there. It's just a matter of looking for it, right?
Yeah, personally, I think it's a natural tendency. Most children are curious about lots of things, and this exists on a range, and where their interests fall may vary, but I think it is natural. And I think one of the best ways to encourage polymathy in young children is to find out what they're curious about and then support that exploration, rather than like, you must learn about what I say, which is how school is. At least outside of school, really finding out what they want to learn about and then doing it with them, or getting them the tools or the resources or the supplies or the classes or whatever, so that they can really author that learning journey themselves.
To Angela's point there, super important. My mom was a police officer, as I said. I snuck out of my house regularly when I got my first bicycle and rode my bike 25 miles across town to the junior college library. And I would sneak in, and I thought I was getting away with this, and I would do this for weeks. I was about 9. And I would ride in the ditches and everything. And one day, the librarian called my mom. They pulled me over to the side. They asked me, they had my information where on my book bag, it said how to call a mom and everything. So they called my mom. My mom was a non-uniform wearing police officer. She was a detective. So she would come in, she'd have this gun, and she came to this library. And I see her talking to the librarian. Now, I wasn't privy to the conversation, but I was privy to the outcome. And what I found out later was that my mom was asking the librarian, what was I going and reading every single time. And what I was doing is I was going looking at space shuttles and basically all the parts. And what they had in there was a manual you get when you go to Space Academy. And I was reading it almost every single time, a thick manual. And my mom basically got the librarian through whatever arrangement to allow me to bring that book home. Obviously, I don't go to college, I'm a child, and I was able to check out the book. And that's how my mom reacted versus discipline. And trust me, she wouldn't let me ride the bike forever. But it was the gift of how she handled my knowledge and my curiosity that changed my life. So be that mom.
One other quick thing too, I learned through my interviews is most polymaths are readers. So if you can instill a love of reading in particular, I mean, it's a kind of learning, but a love of reading, that will help that person become more polymathic.
Just on a childhood context, the thing I would recommend most is Montessori school, because the entire school is designed for children to explore different areas on their own, while teachers are kind of standing back as guides whenever they need. So that model itself is actually a proper model of kind of human functioning, independent functioning. So that's what I would recommend. Last question is by Jeff. Jeff, go ahead.
So Angela and Chris, really wonderful session. And Chris, I can hear just over and over again in your reflections and in your stories that there are two more P's here in addition to polymathy, or maybe these are just additional aspects of it. But one of them is you're telling the story of your purpose and how your purpose evolved and developed and has been clarified from your experience. I think that evolving to be able to clearly, explicitly state a higher purpose is a huge step forward and something that's super important in the world. And second is the ability to work effectively with people. The folks who put together this conversational intelligence book have started something called the Getting to We Institute. And it's so smart. And the ability to do that successfully, as opposed to, me versus the other person, or just the other person, it is just essential. And so I would offer that developing, and being able to clarify a higher purpose and being able to successfully get to we with other people are certainly additional aspects of polymath. What do you think about that?
I think that it's an amazing observation and opinion on the matter. I will say this, that, I thought from the age of 6 years old, I was going to be president of the United States of America. Well, I know for everybody's knowledge, I am not president, at least yet. But if I were to let what I thought to be my purpose not happening be what prevented me from finding my actual purpose, I would never be here with you all today. And oftentimes we mistake the fact that we may have not found our purpose yet with the fact that we don't have a purpose. And, so life is mainly about cultivating your passions and cultivating outcomes you're good at and cultivating the inspirations that move you. And collectively, that is your purpose. And as long as you're okay with the fact that things may be added to that, some things may be taken away along the way, and it's a dynamic thing, then you will get the dynamic outcome in your life that you seek. I promise that.
Wonderful. So any closing words, Chris and Angela?
Chris, do you have anything?
It's been a true pleasure. I get the opportunity to speak in a lot of interesting and crazy rooms, but it's rooms like this that are my favorite. And it's because, we spend so much time in our lives focusing on what makes us all different. I mean, I'm sure all of us do, especially those that identify with things like being a polymath. But I tell you this for certain. Life is really about celebrating the things that make us all the same. And if it wasn't for the two leaders that put this together, to find a room that does make us all the same, we would never have the opportunity to learn about what makes us all different. So I appreciate that. And I'm very thankful for both of you for making this possible.
Thank you. Angela?
Yeah, Chris, I just want to thank you for sharing your story so honestly, too, the good, the bad, the ugly. And I think it's a beautiful story, and you're such a strong polymath. So thank you so much for spending time with us today and sharing about your story. A few final comments. You know, at the end of the day, polymathy is like a way of living life. It's it says, I'm going to be open. I'm going to be all in. I'm going to view life as an adventure and be an explorer and an author and a curator of my own life experience. And what we do in a work setting is part of it. I mean, it takes up, you know, a third of our weekday hours if you work 8 hours a day. And so being thoughtful about your career is important. And, you know, what I want to say too is self-awareness is so important. If you realize that you are naturally a polymathic person, then what you need to do in your own mind is say, I may have to be an advocate. I may have to be thoughtful for how to not languish, as Caroline said, and really make a career that feels authentic. And even if it's not career, maybe it's your hobbies when you're retired or that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, you're the driver of your career. And so I just want to encourage you all to think about it that way, that it's up to you to use your talents to make sure your talents don't go wasted. And maybe your job won't give you everything, but then you can find hobbies and side gigs and avocations, like the Root Bernstein definition was at the beginning, that it can be vocations or avocations. It can be at the same time, or it can be back to back over the years. So you get to be the author of your experience and enjoy it, make it yours.
Wonderful. Thank you, Angela. These conversations have been amazing. And Chris, that was very inspiring. Not only your story, but I particularly liked, you know, I was blown away by your story, but I also liked the way in which you answered all the questions. You know, we get very thoughtful people here, and we get people who are actually doing this in their lives. So these were the questions which were about what is actually involved in being a polymath, and you were able to answer them just beautifully. So really appreciate that. So thank you very much for a wonderful, wonderful afternoon, and you're always welcome to come back.
Thank
All right.
you very much.
And to everybody else, thank you very much for coming. You're the ones who add a lot of value, because it is this conversation that makes everything rich. So thank you, and see you soon. Bye.